Good evening. Welcome to the 9th annual Dr. Darrell A. Treffert Lecture Series on Autism and Savant. Thank you all for coming. I am Dr. Aida Miklowski, professor and counselor of the Alpha Delta Theta chapter of Kappa Delta Pi, the International Honor Society in Education, and co-sponsor of this event. I'd like to thank Agnesian Healthcare Center, Agnesian Healthcare, the Treffert Center volunteers, the Marian Outreach, IT, and Facilities team. Thank you also to our new president, Dr. Andrew Mannion, our Dean of School of Education, Dr. Sue Stoddard. I think she was the parking attendant this afternoon. Where is she? And most of all, thank you to Dr. Treffert, who invited and convinced Dr. Temple Grandin to come to Fond du Lac. Okay. And now, yeah. Now, Dr. Treffert will be introducing Dr. Grandin to you.
Thank you. Indeed, thank you for coming. I think we have a very interesting evening. Thanks to Ida, who has arranged for 9 years now each of these lectures, and including this one. And we've had some really good successes in the past. You may remember Leslie Lemke's concert and Jason Padgett and Taylor Crow. And this year we're privileged to have Temple Grandin. And I want to thank Marian College and University and, of course, Agnesian Healthcare. I'm pleased that Temple was able to fit into her schedule this meeting. I talked to her about a year ago and asked if she would come to Fond du Lac, and she said she would, and she had one date, May 20th, 2016. I said, I'll take it, and so here we are. She has 85% of her time is spent on the road, and when she leaves here, she'll be going to other meetings such as this, and she divides her time, half the time between autism lectures and the other half with animal science lectures, all of which are massively attended. I think on Tuesday, as I remember, she's going to Europe, to Switzerland and to England to meet with both those groups. I want to thank Marian for allowing us to use the gym. Originally, we were going to use the auditorium, but it was obvious that it was going to be a popular lecture, so they kindly decided to let us use the gym, and I think we should give them a round of applause for that. Temple is well known internationally, and recently had a very high honor and elected into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a very distinguished and elite group of people almost throughout history. And she was inducted because of her animal handling and autism education efforts. More and more, there are times where people will list 100 prominent women, and more Temple's name appears on those lists. Now, let me provide a little bit of background as to how her path and mine crossed. My introduction to autism was a very long time ago, and it's sort of good news and bad news. The good news is that in 1955, when I was a sophomore in medical school and just had married Dorothy, and we were in my second year of medical school, there was an ad in the newspaper by a frantic family. And they said, we have a little boy who doesn't talk, and doesn't relate to us. And we wonder if there's anybody out there that could help. We answered the ad. And so for a number of weeks, had this little lad coming to our house, trying to get him to talk, trying to relate to him. We didn't cure him, but I did at least manage to get him to be able to put pennies in a piggy bank one after another and have enough attention for that. That was the good news. The bad news was that the next year in medical school, in my junior year, was my first rotation through child psychiatry. And the child psychiatry department was housed in a house on the grounds of the hospital. My first day on that rotation, I walked up to the house, and it was this. I went into the house, and there was a 12-year-old girl, autistic, mute, with a helmet, pounding her head on the desk loud enough to shake the house. And I wondered at that time, there must be some island of intactness in this girl. She's imprisoned by her autism, but surely somewhere there's an intact element. And began the search for what I call the island of intactness in autistic kids. I got assigned the children's unit at Winnebago to start a children's unit at Winnebago. We had 800 patients, and we took 25 of those and put them on a children's unit, which I was then supposed to lead and run. But there wasn't a place to go look up how do you run a children's unit, because there weren't any others. So we had to do it ourselves. And I said to my staff, let's look for that island of intactness. It's in there. Let's find it, coax it, treat it, reward it, and with that will come better language and better social skills, and indeed, that's what happened. I also met my first 3 savants on that unit. One little guy had memorized the bus system of the city of Milwaukee. And if you told him the bus number and the time of day, he'd tell you what corner that bus is going by just then. Another little guy was mute, and you could take a jigsaw puzzle, 250-piece jigsaw puzzle, put it on the desk, picture side down, and he would put it together just from the geometric shapes. The third little guy was an expert on what happened in this day in history. I'd come on the unit every morning, he'd say, Dr. Treffert, you know what happened in this day in history? I'd bone up the night before. And this was before the internet. I had to use the encyclopedia, but never could best what he did. We had a 4th little guy who made free throws. He put his feet in exactly the same place, hold the ball in exactly the same way. Trajectory is the same, and so every time it went through. So anyway, I got interested in the savant syndrome, and I've had that interest ever since. I went on to be director of the hospital, and of course, many of you have probably heard my favorite joke about that, but I was a young superintendent, didn't look like a superintendent apparently. And one night we had a situation at the hospital for which I had to go back. I was just in my street clothes and must have been looking rather anxious because one of the patients came up to me. He said, I haven't seen you here before. Who are you? I said, I'm Dr. Treffert, and I run the hospital. He gave me a very knowing and a very reassuring look, and he said, you'll get over that. I thought I was the governor when I came in here. More good news. Dr. Leo Kanner, who first described early infantile autism in 1943, he named the condition. And he was the first physician to describe early infantile autism. It turns out that his son was an ophthalmologist in Madison, And so he would come to visit his son, and then he would meet with medical students such as myself. So I'm so old that I remember Dr. Canner and learning from him. He was a grandfatherly man. At Johns Hopkins, described after seeing thousands of patients, 12 patients with early infantile autism, and I had the opportunity to learn from him. More good news. In 1986, I came across a book. It was called Emergence Labeled Autistic by Temple Grandin. It was a description of her emergence from autism. It tells the story of a child born in the 50s for whom institutionalization was recommended. 2.5 years old, no speech, no eye contact, tantrums, and constant repetitive behaviors. But the mother was unconvinced about an institutionalization, and she cobbled together some therapists, a speech therapist that came to the home 3 hours a week, and also had a highly structured nursery class that she attended, along with some other children, not all of whom were autistic. Today we call that ABA training desensitization and monitoring. She was fortunate to encounter these talented teachers, and remember, that was in the 1950s. Well, it turns out that in one sense, Temple and I grew up together because my first introduction to autism was in the 50s. She as an autistic person and me as a physician trying to understand autism, and in that way we've traveled the same paths together. There was a science teacher that recognized her art ability and her science ability and has had a major impact on her life, taking her into the animal science field. So there you have the team: a concerned and advocate parent, caring teachers, speech and other therapists, a mentor who recognized the talent and took it and ran with it, and a system that recognized the strengths, not disability. The final good news is that the movie Rain Man came out in 1989. I had the opportunity to be a consultant to the movie Rain Man, and it changed the face of autism understanding throughout the world. It was an excellent movie and brought autistic savant into household terms. Barry Morrow, who wrote Rain Man, he and I have become very good friends, and I'm thinking of inviting him next year for our speaker because we're working on a project that I can't really tell you about at the moment. Anyway, you watched the Temple Grandin HBO program, and so you know the rest of the story. Today, Temple is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, having earned that degree at the University of Illinois. Being a professor in the livestock industry is her primary identity, and autism is secondary. And she recommends our view of that for all people with autism. But she's here tonight to talk about autism. She has many, many books for parents, teachers, therapists, and the public. Her parent-friendly writing style reminds me somewhat of Dr. Spock of old for people with children, and a cross between Oliver Sacks, who was such a tremendous writer. And I see those both shining through her books. It's a pleasure to have Temple here in Fond du Lac with us. She and I labor and have for a long time in the same vineyard. And what a pleasure it is to know her as a friend and as a colleague. Temple Grandin.
Really great to be here today. Got lots of things to talk about today. And the first, now it doesn't seem to be working. Wait a minute, what's happening here? Hello, is that working now? Okay. Autism is a very broad spectrum. One end of it, wait a minute, I keep hitting the wrong thing. One end of the spectrum, you got Einstein. Maybe this is one of these mics. I got to hold it just right, or it has a big fit. At one end of the spectrum, you've got Einstein, Mozart, half of Silicon Valley. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody that remains very severe. Now, the thing is, people get too hung up on the labels. When I was a little kid, I looked really, really severe. Fortunately, my ability in art was always encouraged. Take that thing the kid's good at and build on it. If he likes Thomas the Train, well, then let's use that to learn more about how trains work. There'd be a lot of science. In fact, today there's a huge shortage of diesel mechanics and auto mechanics. I understand that right now there's 200 welding jobs that need to be filled. You've got a lot of industry here. And the problem is some of the kids that'd be really good at working that industry are kind of going down a special ed route they shouldn't be going down. I worked on both of these plants in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Packerland and the other plant. They've got my center track restrainer equipment. They've got a head device I designed. You want to see how those things work? You can look it up on Beef Plant Video Tour. And when I worked on those projects, at those plants and at many other plants, I worked with millwrights and welders that I know are on the spectrum. People that today would be in their 50s and 60s. So as I go back and forth between the two different worlds, I'm seeing people on the milder end of the spectrum who've been successful, like what the Silicon Valley. Oh, they avoid the labels. Half of them are on the spectrum. I want to see kids be successful. And Mother had a very good sense of just how much to stretch me. She always gave me choices, but staying in my room and becoming a recluse in my room was not one of them. And when I was 15, I had a chance to go out to my aunt's ranch, and I was afraid to go. So she gave me a choice. I could go for a week, or I could go all summer. Staying at home wasn't going to be one of the choices. And that's how I got interested in the cattle industry, because when I was 15, I was exposed to cattle. Now, I'm pleased that here in Wisconsin, you still got skilled trades in your classes. I'm going to guess that about 25% of these kids are skilled trades where they ought to be. It's not everybody, but it certainly is some of them. I worked on a lot of these plants, and these are complicated, big things. Also, I had a great time going out to the Ver-Char Dairy today. Really, really super nice dairy, because I've always got to get some animal stuff in. Because people ask me, why don't you just give up the livestock industry and just do autism? Autism is an important part of who I am. But the work that I've done in the cattle industry comes first. Because I'm seeing too many smart kids where all they want to do is autism advocacy. I didn't do any autism advocacy until I'd already been in the cattle industry for over 10 years. Where they're getting so much into that when they ought to be getting more into music or art or some other thing they'd be good at doing. Because I want to say, kids, get out there and be successful. And I've made a point of jumping between the silos, doing business talks, animal talks, autism, and I want to see kids be what they can be. Too many kids are getting babied. They're not learning basic skills like shopping, things that I learned when I was in elementary school. You gotta stretch. You've absolutely gotta stretch. I'm very pleased to find out that here in Wisconsin, you've got a new program where at 14, some of these kids that are different can start getting their job skills. Really good. We got to hook them on welding when they're young. Then college is almost too late. Because too many individuals at 18 or 22 that are jumping off the service cliff. I had a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. At 13, Mother got me my first job working for seamstress. At 15, I was cleaning 8 horse stalls every single day. I went out to my aunt's ranch, and she had guests, and I took guests on trail rides. That was really fun. Waiting on tables was not so fun, but that was part of the job. I was painting signs and selling them, getting work experience outside the home. Middle school, let's start the church jobs, walking dogs. I want something outside the home they've got to do on a schedule, because I want to see kids be successful. Now, when I was young, I sometimes made some big mistakes. And I remember my first job. And I criticized some welding, and I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo. That was not the thing to say. And the plant engineer at the Swift plant in Tolleson, Arizona, this is back in 1974, pulled me into his office and explained to me that that was rude and I needed to apologize. There were some people that actually did help me. You got to teach social skills by explaining to them how to act. Also, when I was young, I thought everybody was a visual thinker just like me. So when some mistakes got made on a job, I go, well, how could they be that stupid? Couldn't they see it? What I learned is there's a lot of things the mathematician mind doesn't say. That's why we need to have us visual thinkers on the projects. There's things that we do see. But your first step is you got to understand that there are different kinds of minds, and they need to work together, and the skills can complement each other. Oh, there's common conflicts. The techies have always hated the suits. Oh, boy. I'd be over there at the office at one of the plants in Green Bay, and I used to sit down in the engineering office. We'd complain about the suits. We did that in every different plant. And then I remember one old plant maintenance guy in Colorado. This was a long time ago. And he always had to get good things for his employees. So he had Bench of the Month Club. Every month they would redo one of the platforms the workers stood on and bootleg money out of one of the budgets. We just thought that was really funny. We outfoxed the suits. But you need to have both, because the visual thinkers aren't very good on organization. You need to have some kind of suit minds to have organization. They're both important. The people in the field can't stand the academics. Some of it has to do with different ways of solving problems. Another big fight that goes on in science is some people say observation's not real science. You know, what's epidemiology? You get a case of food poisoning here, another case of food poisoning over here. Well, and then you try to piece them together. That's bottom-up thinking. You see, when having the hypothesis first, much more top-down, much more word-based. And the artists have never liked the accountants. Yeah. Okay, is observation part of real science? What's astronomy? I used to fight with my PhD professors about what is science. Well, some of the most expensive projects in science have been merely observation. Because many times you have to make an observation before you can even make the hypothesis in the first place. Now, when I learned that visual thinking was different than verbal thinking, it gave me a lot of insight. I remember a job I had years ago. This would have been in the late 70s. And they were jerking some rails out of the ceiling at a plant in Texas. And I go, how could they be so stupid? Couldn't they see they'd pull the rails out if they did that? They just didn't see it. Yeah, but there's certain mathematical things that I can't do. We need to be working together. Now, this is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. I think completely in pictures. And the HBO movie did a fabulous job of showing how I think in pictures. I could test run equipment in my mind, and I couldn't do algebra. I'm seeing a lot of smart kids all around the country getting stymied by algebra. They're not allowed to become a diesel mechanic because they can't do algebra. You don't need algebra for diesel mechanics. Chemistry, yes, you need it, but not diesel mechanics. You need 6th grade math. That you're going to need, because if you're going to design some dairy equipment, you're going to have to find the volume of a tank. And you have to have people that can maintain the milking equipment. That requires technicians, kind of the skilled trades kinds of people. Then you have the pattern thinker. These are the mathematicians, computer programmers, engineers, where the visual thinkers like me do the industrial design, art, graphic design. There's two parts of making a product. You have the industrial design part. For example, that'd be Steve Jobs making the interface on the iPhone, and then the engineers have to make the inside of the phone work. Okay, so I go like this, I go like this, I go like that, airplane mode. Well, somebody had to make that work. So you have the mathematical mind who thinks in patterns, and the visual thinker who thinks in pictures. In your brain, you got circuits for what is something. I've got overactive what is something circuits. Another kind of mind maybe has overactive where are you located in space circuits. And then you've got the verbal guy, thinks in language, and some people are totally an auditory thinker. I had a student who understood animals because she was really sensitive to the sounds they made. You know, high-pitched sounds tend to be distress calls. And there's science that shows that these different kinds of minds actually do exist. And all that science is in my book, The Autistic Brain. Yes, I will be signing books afterwards. Always do that. Now, what are some characteristics of visual thinking? It's bottom up. There's two ways you can approach a problem. Top down, you make a policy, try to cram everybody into it. I think education's got way too much top-down thinking. Oh, yes, we're going to put an iPad in every school in California. It's going to make it wonderful. Well, it didn't, because that doesn't replace good teaching. Bottom up, the way you do bottom-up problem solving, let's say I was looking at education, I'd look at, let's take the 10 best schools. And one of the things I want to look at is career outcomes. What kind of careers are these students going into? Successful careers. Okay, what are the worst 10 schools? What are some of the common denominators of the worst schools and the best schools? Instead of looking at the average, I want to look at the very worst, and I want to look at the very best. When you think bottom up, concepts are formed with specific examples. And you take specific examples and put them in categories. So if you ask a visual thinker like me, think about a church steeple, I see specific examples. They come up as specific pictures, flashing up like PowerPoint slides. Then I asked the speech therapist that question, and she goes, pointy thing. I go, what pointy thing? You see, that's a much more generalized. Visual thinkers notice detail. This helped in my work with cattle. Visual detail, really good management. Whether it's a dairy or whether it's a school, also requires attention to detail, how you do things. Also, if you're working with animals, it's sensory-based, not word-based. You want to understand animal behavior, you need to get away from verbal language. And some of the best people with animals, the kind of dyslexic people, maybe a little bit of autism, I worked with a lot of millwrights that were dyslexic. There's a whole family of dyslexic millwrights that builds big, gigantic feed mills. Yeah, big, complicated things. Yeah, don't stick your nose out bad. I worked with a lot of smart people on a lot of complicated projects. Visual thinking is also associative. Word thinking is much more linear. Visual thinking tends to associate. So we tend to be disorganized. So we're going to need some verbal thinkers to keep us organized. That's one of the reasons why many of my books have a co-author, because I've got to have that for organization. Okay, in the very first work I did with livestock, I noticed when cattle were going through a chute, they would stop if they saw a car or a chain on a facility, or maybe a coat on a fence, a hose on the ground, some little thing that we don't even notice. Okay, if you had a dairy and you had a hose on the ground, the experienced cows would just walk over it. But the new heifer's not going to walk over it. You've got to give her a chance to come up, stop, put her head down, take a look, and then she'll learn to walk over it. Or there might be a certain shadow. But if you just shove her up there the first time and she falls down, it's a bad first experience in the parlor. That's really bad. She's going to be stressed out. I was very happy to see the cows chewing their cuds in the parlor. Even when the automatic gate went up, they were still chewing their cuds. That means that they're relaxed. That's really, really good. All right, let's see how good you are at observation. Raise your hand if you notice that that animal is looking at the sunbeam. We're doing pretty good here. When I showed this slide to elementary school kids, over half the hands went up. When I showed it to mathematicians and engineers at Fermilab, almost no hands went up. When I showed it at a big educational conference, almost no hands go up. You see, the more visual you are, the more you tend to notice it. Okay, look at how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other, and the other ear's on me. So I try to teach my students, what's your animal looking at? What's it pointing its ears at? What is it doing? Pay attention to details. I'm always getting asked, do animals know they're going to get slaughtered? Always get asked that question. And I found they behave the same way at the meat plant as they behave going in a chute at the veterinarian. Yeah, there's some stress, but it's the same range of stress. If you want to see how things that I've designed work, like the center track restrainer system that both your big plants have in Wisconsin, you can look up Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin and see how these things work. just got a new video up, sheep plant video tour. Now, that's not my equipment. It's a New Zealand sheep line. But you're going to see some very clever mechanical engineering in that. That's skilled trades, inventing mechanical things. The interesting thing I've observed now, that I understand the different kinds of minds, is how they fit together and all these great big huge complex meatpacking plants are worked on. The draftsman lays out the basic layout, invents a lot of equipment. A lot of clever equipment's invented by the guys in the shop. Maybe those kids that took welding in school and they weren't that great a student. And the degreed engineers will do refrigeration and boilers, trusses, ground compaction. And the young ones all get ripped off by the contractors. But you still have to have the different kinds of minds. I wouldn't touch boilers, so that's way too dangerous for me. I don't understand that. We'll let the mathematicians handle that. But you see, you need to have the different minds working together. Another interesting thing I observed as the meat industry in the mid-90s went from hand drafting to computer drafting. We started to see strange mistakes on drawings, and they were perceptual mistakes. Like the center of the circle was not in the center of the circle. They were putting in 25-foot-long gates. It's not going to work because they never laid a scale ruler on it. They weren't seeing their drawings. I got drawings from many, many different companies. And when I checked out who did the drawings, it was always a kid in his early 20s, never had built anything by hand, never had drawn by hand, had taken the 2-year community college course. See, the problem is you need to touch to perceive. And people that built things and people that drew by hand did not make these mistakes on the drawings. Then I went out to Pixar. Really interesting. They found sometimes they got to get them off the computers and get them to draw by hand. I went out to another animation studio. They were printing out cartoon characters on a big 3D printer and putting them all around the mouse pad where they could touch. And Oliver Sacks had a very interesting article about an adult person who had cataracts taken off, so got vision as an adult. And he described learning how to see. And he had to touch his pet before he could figure out this black and white thing that was wiggling around was his pet. He had to touch to learn how to see. Sensory really is important. Now, in the mind of an animal, a person on a horse is a different picture than a person on the ground. So it's really important to teach your cattle to tolerate both. It's a different picture. Pigs, for example, it's a different picture, a man in the alley versus a man in their pen. So it's really important to get them used to people walking through them. I've seen in dairies, okay, they get used to people walking behind the cows, people walking in front of the cows, they're going to be nice and tame. Nobody ever walks in front of the cows. They might be scared of people in front of the cows. Now, today, they were really nice. They were coming up and sniffing us and wanting to lick us because many people had been around these cows. They were very gentle, really nice cows. But the animal is much more specific than we are because that memory is a picture or a specific sound associated with something either good or bad. Now, visual thinking's been a great asset because when I designed things, I could test run it in my head. I didn't know that other people couldn't do that. This is one of my cattle handling facilities. Why is it laid out like this? Because as the cattle come on around the bend, they want to go back to where they come from. That's using the animal's natural behavior to help you. And there's a nice little simple layout that you can design on your dairy or your beef farm. You can even set this one up out of portable panels. I don't know if this pointer's going to work over here or not. I don't think it's strong enough, but the guy stands right there, and you just set the gate, and the cattle will come right on around you. Nice and simple, using behavior. Use the animal's natural behavior. So how does associative thinking work? Let you think about that. So you say a key word like shoes. So the first picture that comes up in my head is some childhood shoes. Oh, I hated these shoes. I hated the dress I had to wear. Horrible, scratchy petticoats. I can start to feel them now. That's a better childhood memory. I can think of lots of fun things I did while wearing those when I was a child. Here's some more good childhood shoes. And I'm really, really glad to see that back in style now. Oh, wonderful. 1950s, back in style. I also like the fact that the young people today love our music. Oh, 60s and 70s, it was the best, absolutely the best. You can't beat Beatles, it's the best. And this is the shoe I wear today. So now I start thinking about the things I've stepped in those boots. I've done some dog poo at one place I went to. I'm not going to show you that. Now I was out at our experiment station, and I got quite a bit of mud on them. You know, it starts coming up like specific pictures. So I can get into different files. I can think about different hotels these shoes have stepped in. And I kind of like the hotels, like the Holiday Inn and things like that. I kind of like that sameness, because sleeping's what I want to do in hotels. But you see how I'm associating? How did I get from these boots to Holiday Inns? But you can see there's an association, because now I'm thinking of all the places I've walked in. Oh, yes. When I get back home to Denver, I'm probably going to want something to eat, so I get something to eat at the United Concourse, and then I got to stop at A Concourse to go to Ben & Jerry's. Yes, they moved the Ben & Jerry's out of United, put it over in the other concourse, but I still like to go over there. Okay, you see, this is where associative thinking can sometimes just wander a bit too much. Okay, mud puddles, that's things I've stepped in those shoes. Here's some evidence that the different kinds of minds actually exist. You want science? I can give you science, and there's more of it in my autistic brain book. Got to have the evidence base this day, or nobody's going to believe it. There's one of my drawings. So when you're weird, how did I sell myself? By showing off drawings and pictures of my work. And I have seen kids on the spectrum that had absolutely beautiful artwork, and the parents didn't even have that artwork on their phone. We need to be showing that work. How did I get a big job with Cargill? I designed the front end of all the Cargill plants in North America. The stockyards, center track restrainer, unloading ramp. Well, in the late 80s, I sent Bill Fielding a portfolio with a big drawing in it like this, a nice brochure, so a couple of articles. I'm going to call it the 30-second wow. You don't send him a whole book full of stuff. I want something that when they unfold it, he goes, oh, wow, that's really good. And that's how I originally got that job. Now, I used to joke around that a huge internet circuit in my head for visual thinking. Turns out that I do. And there's another scan of it. Big visual thinking circuit all the way back to the deep primary visual cortex. Now, that's a circuit for speak what you see. That's a normal one. There's mine. Got a lot of extra branches. That may explain why you put in a keyword, I get pictures. But I paid a price for that. When you look at the bandwidth, for speak what you see, I have less bandwidth. So that may explain why I had delayed speech. And I fortunately got into very good speech therapy. There's 3 basic ways the brain can be messed up on speech. Expressive, can't get it out. I had some problems with receptive. When the grown-ups talked fast, it went into gibberish because I didn't hear the hard consonant sounds. And my speech teacher would slow down and enunciate the hard consonant sounds. Slow down when you talk to these kids. Also give them a chance to respond. They're like a slow computer. Give them a chance to respond. And another way that speech can be messed up is echolalia. They yak out movie scripts, but they don't know what they mean. They got the language, but they don't have the meaning circuit hooked up. So that's the 3 ways that language can be messed up. Now, this is the rect math department there on the right-hand side. Working memory is a problem. Do not burden these kids with long strings of verbal instructions. Give them a pilot's checklist, 1, 2, 3, 4, for anything where there's a sequential steps. Let's say it's cleaning the ice cream machine at McDonald's or whatever. Take apart, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cleaning, 1, 2, 3, 4. Put it back together. Pilot's checklist. Don't do a rambling description of it the way MapQuest does. Oh, I hate MapQuest. Just hate it. I want bullet points. That's the way I want it. So you do a workaround. And some kids that can't do algebra can do geometry just fine. And recently I was in Provo, Utah at the university, they said, okay, you don't have to take algebra, you can take statistics instead. What saved me in college was in '67, the required class was finite math. Probability, matrices, and statistics. That saved me. I'm seeing too many smart kids that you need over here in this factory you got right here. And they're getting screened out, and they don't need algebra to do most of those jobs. And what little bit of higher math they'd need, they can just memorize the formulas for it. Okay, in 1968, I tried to do computer programming on this state-of-the-art IBM computer. Bill Gates had access to this, so boy, he did it. So this brings up the whole thing about innate ability. And where I think innate ability makes the biggest difference is where you have an extreme ability, like maybe music, some of the savant things that Dr. Treffert talks about, or maybe extreme disability. And we spend too much time pounding away on the thing the kid cannot do. Industrial design's all about art. And I'm going to be showing you a thing later that shows why you need visual thinkers like me to avoid some big problems. Now, I wanted to get insight myself into the mind of the mathematical thinker. How's a mathematical thinker work? This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no tape. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern. I'm going, well, that's not me. There are some great little origami stars. You know, I'm seeing too many things where kids aren't doing enough hands-on. Recently, I went into an elementary school in another state, and they were learning their shapes, but they were not drawing them. They were not cutting them out. I think you really do have to touch to perceive. And the thing that I saw, the observations I made with these drawings, when my industry switched from hand drawing to computer drawing, the old people switched fine. And then my assistant, I had him build a cattle handling facility in my backyard and learn to hand draw before he went to computer school. So his CAD's really, really nice. There's some more great little origami things. And when I asked an astrophysicist, a person who worked on the Hubble Space Telescope, to tell me about church steeples, he got motion and patterns of people singing and praying. I go, wow, that's really trippy. There's different ways you can do the math. You can do it more verbal or more visual spatial. The other thing I found is having worked so much on construction projects. I was out working with construction crews for 20 years. Did some here at Green Bay, it was a while back. Cargill plants, a bunch of other places. And it's all about getting a job done. You know, there's some schools that say, well, the kids got to tell how they did it or do it all in their head. And one horror story I just heard the other day is that on subtraction, some schools were not allowing a child to make marks on the paper for borrowing and subtraction. Oh, there's no way I could do it. Oh, if I couldn't mark the paper. You know, borrowing and subtraction and marking the paper, that saved me. There's some more evidence about different kinds of minds. Now, the thing is, let's look at some different ways of looking at thinking. Associational versus linear. They both have their pros and cons. You need the linear for organization, but the associational is going to think up more creative ideas. Pictures and patterns versus words. Bottom up versus top down. And when you get too many top-down policies, they just don't work. You can have a brain that's more social or less social. At what point is it an abnormality? Let's look at research with dogs and wolves. This kind of shows the idea of more social or more cognitive. And in this European research with wolves and dogs, what was done is a wolf would watch another wolf open a puzzle box. He'd pay close attention and go up and open it. The domestic dog was so busy asking us for help that he didn't pay enough attention to figure out how to open the box. Because we've bred the dog to be more social. So at what point is geeky and nerdy become a disability? At what point is this just normal variation? I'm seeing too many smart kids kind of getting a handicap mentality. And this really, really worries me. Because then I go, well, out to the meat plant, some other place like that, and there's the old gray hair that I know is on the spectrum, and I can use that term, gray hair, because I am one. Let's look at genetics of personality traits and ability traits. They're like a music mixing board. You can be more anxious or less anxious, more visual, less visual, more mathematical, less mathematical. They're continuous traits. It's not simple Mendelian genetics like, okay, I breed a Holstein to an Angus, I will always end up with a solid black animal. That's simple Mendelian genetics. What would happen to little Stevie today? Little Stevie Jobs, a weird loner. He brought snakes to his elementary school and turned them loose. Oh yes, naughty little kid. How about little Albert Einstein here? No speech until age 3, tantruming, lining up objects. What would happen to him today? This is the thing that really worries me. People are getting too locked into the labels, and I'm seeing bad problems with parents who can't let go. Like I talked to one family, 15-year-old, fully verbal, gifted in movie animation, and I suggested that he go a mile down the road to one of their best friend's office to edit the video. And the mom broke down crying, saying she couldn't let go. I was roofing at 16. I'm not recommending that. I'm recommending working on the video outside the home in their best friend's office or walking dogs for the neighbors. They've got to get out and do things. And some parents just can't let go to the most safest, benign places start learning job skills. Too many kids are getting labeled with various labels. I'm worried our educational system is screening them out. You need them at this factory here. They need them really, really bad. And I'm glad that you're going to be showing kids this factory when they're like 11 and 12, because that's when we got to hook them. That maybe working a computer-operated machine tool would be a really, really cool thing to do. But they've got to get exposed to get interested. Let's take other things like music and theater. Those are careers. But I've gone in some parts of the country, and I'm going to bash it, so I'm not going to say which state, where about all you're going to learn in high school is music, math, and sports. Well, what happened to theater? That's a career. I mean, I should say, wait a minute, English, when I got mixed up there. English, math, and sports. And you're not going to learn very much else. You know, they've taken out sewing, art. When I was in elementary school, if I hadn't had art and sewing, it wouldn't have been worth even going to school. Let's look at some major businesses that are run with people that have dyslexia. This is a great book by Betsy Morris. You can also look up this article in Fortune magazine about dyslexic CEOs. The head of JetBlue had ADHD. He was great selling it to the investors. How about the head of IKEA? ADHD and dyslexia. That's a very successful company. You see, when we start looking at what is successful, you are going to have to be able to read at the level of USA Today and do 6th grade math. Those things you're going to have to be able to do. And the question I always get asked is about reading comprehension. Let's dissect this down and look at different parts of reading comprehension. The first level is the vocabulary level. Okay, there was an article, I don't know, a couple of years ago, about a guy who climbed over the White House fence, went across the lawn, opened the unlocked front door, and got in the White House. Okay, at the most simple level, the vocabulary level, I got to know what a fence is, a lawn is, a lock, a door, a house. That's the most basic. But if I was in Japan, in the city, they don't have lawns. You see how you have to have some knowledge to comprehend? Now, the next level of comprehension is, whose house is that? It's the president's house. Well, who is the president? You see, that takes it up another notch of knowledge that you have to have. And I read about a kid in Texas who took a reading test, and it was about Olympic skiing. And it talked about slalom gates. Well, what are slalom gates? You're not going to understand that article if you don't know about skiing. Well, in Texas, people don't ski. So they're not going to have the knowledge to do the comprehension. Let's not overgeneralize about reading comprehension. Well, here's an example of different kinds of minds working together. Steve Jobs was an artist. He made the interface, the idea for a simple interface for the iPhone. The engineers had to make it work on the inside. All right, this is why you need us visual thinkers, designing safety systems. What you see right there is the remains of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And I like to read a lot of stuff on planes, and when I found out why this burned up, it was a visual thinking mistake so basic I couldn't believe it. If I'd been drawing in concrete elevations for this plant, there's no way I would have made this mistake. I can't design a nuclear reactor, but I only need to know one thing about it. If the emergency cooling pump fails when I need it, you have a mess like Fukushima. And it's not a very good idea when you live next to the sea to put that emergency cooling pump and the generators that operate it in a non-waterproof basement. You heard it. Non-waterproof basement. Simple, watertight doors would have prevented it. But what I've learned is the mathematical mind doesn't see the water going in there. And there's a lot of discussion now about self-driving cars. There needs to be 3 safety systems on a self-driving car that are mechanical, that are non-electronic. An off switch that mechanically disconnects all the power to the computer, an emergency brake with a cable that will work hacker-proof. It's going to be mechanical, and enough mechanical steering so I can get it off the road if I have to. Everything else can be electronic. But the only way I can make those safety devices hacker-proof is to make them non-electronic or old-fashioned electromechanical. Yep, you do need people like me to prevent these kind of messes. And then the second mistake they made is they never asked for help. How could you do this? All you had to do was pick the horn up and call. It wouldn't have even been that hard to stop it. Heavy construction millwrights, I got their card right in my wallet, right with Brad at the book table. You give me the gray hair out of GE, because this is a 60s reactor, a good translator from the UN, and Schmeckley Construction, and we'd get some oil companies to get some big pumps and some big hoses, and we'd flood that sucker before it burns down. It wouldn't have even been that hard. How could you do this? This is a social mistake that is, how could you let it burn up? Man, just read the article in Science. They've burned up the slab underneath. They're dumping water in there. It's leaching through the broken base. They got to pump that out into tanks, radioactive water. They don't know what they're going to do with it. And it's going into the ocean. It's like beyond a mess. Because they didn't see the water going in there and get those watertight doors. That's something that I would have done. Okay, I'm concerned today that too many kids are getting removed from the world of practical things. Hands-on things like metalworking and carpentry work teach practical problem solving. We've got kids today that hold a hammer by that neck because they've never even had a play school workbench to pound in some wooden pegs. We've got a big shortage of skilled trades. And we got a lot of older people in farming and ranching and crops. We need to be getting more young people. I have been out to some wonderful FFA programs. And those are fabulous programs. For some of these kids that are different, some of the public speaking skills you got to do in FFA, absolutely great. This is my salvation. When I was bullied and teased in high school, only places I was not bullied and teased was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Get kids involved with shared interests. It might be music, theater, it could be cooking, it could be a lot of different things. And when I was not studying in high school, I did a lot of carpentry projects. And you can see this old ugly wood shed. And when I got done with it, it was a really attractive wood shed. Yeah, learning how to work. I was about 17 when I did that. And when I was getting my master's, I was out doing freelance sign painting. And I painted that sign at the Arizona State Fair for the Himalayan Monster exhibit. You want a stupid exhibit? It's a really stupid exhibit. They wanted you to think it was a real Yeti, preserved in a freezer chest full of ice. Bull, you know what. I don't even know how I painted that sign on that little bitty ladder. I was a lot younger then. And then this morphed into the corral business. Building up job stuff, one little project at a time. You build up your business. Also, there were some good people in construction to help me get my corporation started, help me with my business when I was in my 20s. We need to be getting kids in these hands-on classes so they can try on careers. I mean, even students in college, I go, wait a minute, take all these different internships, all these different things you can do, try on careers, find out what you like, find out what you hate. Here are sites that can open doors. 4-H small engine repair. Let's get the 11-year-olds interested in engines. Makerspace, Make Magazine, Hackerspace, Khan Academy, free programming lessons. Okay, don't let these kids get addicted to video games. Maybe they need to learn some JavaScript so they learn how to make a video game. We've got to get video game addictions under control. We cannot let it get started. They're not having good outcomes. I'm hearing over and over and over again, he's 18, I can't get him out of the bedroom. And that's a real mess. Just don't let it happen. Also, use the magic word forum. Music forum, computer forum, art forum, farm forum. That opens up a whole lot of different interesting web pages that you can put portfolios on. LinkedIn. How did I get interested in cattle? Because I was exposed to them when I was a teenager. Let's look at this Martian book. This started out as a computer programmer's blog. Then it turned into a 99-cent Kindle. Then it turned into a hit movie. I talked to a parent just 2 days ago in the airport. And their kid was really, really good at a movie blog, and he predicted 6 months in advance 8 out of 10 of the last Oscars. And he wanted to interview me about doing his experience with Asperger's. You know what? I don't care about Asperger's. Why don't you turn that movie blog into a business? I said, you parents are in that business, so fix the kid's webpage, and let's start, clean up his blog, and start turning that into something that can turn into a career, and the heck with the Asperger's. No, I'm glad that that the cattle and the things I was building came first. Now, there are my first 2 projects just starting. There's the DipVat, and that is the Swift plant in 1974. That's the original Stairway to Heaven. We just had our professional animal auditor training 2 days ago. I just came from that. I had to make sure I didn't get smelling like cattle coming here. Yes, you have the right clothes. You can wash them in shampoo in the hotel sink. And I was doing that. And people ask me all the time, how can you care about animals but be involved in slaughtering them? And I eat all of them. Dairy products, I love ice cream, meat. We had some great pork and stuff to eat today. We got to give the animals a good life. And out of the dairy I saw this morning, Verchar Dairy, I saw dairy cows having a really good life. Things were wonderful. Well, we've got to do that. Okay, how did I sell my skills? I wrote in livestock publications. I showed clients pictures. I demonstrated cattle handling. I sold my work, not myself. It's all about selling the work. Don't be afraid to walk through the door of opportunity. I heard a sad story about a girl that won a scholarship to a major art school, and she turned it down because she didn't think she was good enough. Boy, if I'd been her parents, there is no way. No way. You don't turn down that sort of stuff. And when I got asked by Jim Uhl, a contractor, he kind of recruited me. He had to, convince me. Also, on my very first big job in these DipVats, I was at the 60% knowledge level. And when I got asked by the feed yard owner, I said, give me 3 weeks. Because I had some learning to do. I didn't know how to do the concrete reinforcement. So I got on the horn, called up the USDA in Washington to get the drawings for the reinforcement. I didn't try to do it at the 60% level. I asked for enough time to get up to the 90% level. And what I've heard from Sheryl Sandberg is that a guy will take the job at the 60% level, but a girl wants to be at the 90% level. But the really stupid guys will try to do the job at the 40% level. And I have seen gigantic messes. The egomaniacs, they won't listen to anybody. I've seen them make messes, that cost millions of dollars and ended up in a shut-down meatpacking plant. Real mess. Okay, I had to get on that phone to find out how to do that concrete reinforcing, and there's Jim the contractor. There were good people in the industry. In the movie, there were people that were bad to me. Being a woman in the 70s, getting started in a man's cattle world was not easy. The only women working in the feed yards in the 70s worked in the office. And the people that were bad, that did things like putting bull testicles on my vehicle, they were the foremans. They were the layer of management just below the big managers. The big managers and the owners did not do the bad things. A lot of those people actually helped me. There's the original drawing for the DipVat, and I love the fact in the movie that they put drawings from actual jobs in that movie. I love that. There's the DipVat that was recreated from the original drawings for the movie. It was a real DipVat, actually worked, didn't have any chemicals. I just thought that was so cool. There's cattle coming up the lane into the real one. Okay, get your portfolio out there. Avoid the regular interviews. Put things up on LinkedIn. Get into coding competitions. Oh, I looked up all these things in Wired Magazine and other places like Facebook Hacker Cup, Google Code Jam, Top Coder, Code Forces. These are things where you can show your programming off, but only put your good stuff in. You want the 30-second wow, like maybe this much code on a page with a title saying this is code that does such and such and blah, 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 and they can look at it very quickly and go, oh, wow, that is nice. And there's my brochure when I started my business. I didn't put any autism stuff on this. And back when I was putting this together in the 70s, 4-color printing cost a fortune. So I had to figure out how to make it with a really nice, textured, nice paper, so it looked really professional. This would go in my package, fold-out drawing, a couple of articles, plastic pages of pictures, nice cover letter, 30-second wow. That was something I figured out really early on. All right, let's get a little bit of respect for skilled trades. When you take the covers off the jet engine, it's really complex. I'm going on an airplane tomorrow. Let's have a little respect for the people who built that engine and the people that maintain it. Takes some smart people to maintain it. All right, a lot of young people today in the cities don't know where their food comes from, but they're interested in it. And this is where, like the dairy I went to this afternoon, they have tours. Needs to be more things, getting more things online, doing what Fair Oaks is doing outside of Chicago. They have tour buses go through there. Because we got to show young people in the cities good stuff that ag's doing. And a lot of people think big is bad. What I have found is badly managed is bad. What's important is good management. You can have good managed big, good managed small. You can have badly managed big or badly managed small. It's the level of management that's important. And the good managers pay attention to the detail. Like today over at the dairy, I noticed how they were doing the milking. The people were working very efficiently, but they were taking time to place the cups, not just chuck them on the cows. There's a difference. And the cows, I could tell by the way they were reacting really well. Okay, 31% of students have never been on a farm. But the other thing I'm finding as I go into some of the farming areas, that a lot of farming people have no Facebook friends in Chicago or Milwaukee or some other big city. So a lot of people in the city are inside the box, but a lot of people in farming are also horribly inside the box. Well, 50% of young adults in the UK cannot connect pigs with bacon. That's like pretty bad, really bad. Some people thought bacon was made out of wheat. I don't think so. And along with Fair Oaks in Illinois, there's a pig farm called Pig Adventure, a big indoor pig farm. And I asked him, what's the most common kind of really weird question you get? Are those actually pigs? I think they think they're Disney animatronic pigs. I don't think so. But one of my big concerns today was social media. It's making people get worse on getting in their bubbles. You probably looked at some of the controversy about Facebook and what they're doing with the news. You tend to like people that have the same interests are looking at the same interests. I was talking to a lady the other day, and she said she got all her news off of Facebook, and I suggested that she get an electronic subscription to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times because I like my news balanced. I like to read both of them, but I'm very concerned today that a lot of young people, a lot of people today are not reading deeply. I'm seeing fewer and fewer people on the airplanes reading news deeply. Fewer newspapers, though the flight to Milwaukee actually had quite a few. But a flight from Seattle to Denver that I took about a month ago had only one newspaper on a Airbus. It's my newspaper. As we're using more and more mobile apps, I think people are going to get worse about getting in the silos. I don't think that's a good thing. And there are even some teenagers that don't know what regular Google is. So one of the classes that I have, one of the assignments that I have the students do in my livestock class, they got to do a drawing, but they also have to look up journal articles on 4 different databases and learn that there's great databases like Google Scholar, PubMed. You can look up the scientific journal articles. I'm finding about 1/3 of young students today don't even know those databases exist. I think that's an important thing for them to learn. We got to take the silos down. It's getting harder. I found this picture of a hydraulic jaw nibbling away at the silo. Yeah, we've got to work on this. You got to show kids interesting things. There was a scene in the movie where I saw the optical illusion room and I got interested. I was fascinated with optical illusions. And what I learned in psychology about optical illusions helped me in my work with cattle, because it made me think about what are they seeing. You see, that's going across a discipline. And now a lot of research groups are going across disciplines. In engineering, for example, they like the person who's got computer science, some physics, some electrical engineering. You kind of mix and match those things, that's going to make you really hot. That's what top employers want now. There's one of my designs in SketchUp, free software for doing three-dimensional drawing. There's all kinds of stuff online out there. Well, just to end up, I thought it was interesting that MakerBot puts this warning: patience is required to use a 3D printer, because the thing is, 3D printer is not electronic. It's a little glue gun that kind of goes around like this. You get impatient with it. It's certainly not going to work. That's something that a lot of kids need to learn, is some patience, working with hands-on things. Kids want to do hands-on things. I went to a maker fair a year ago in Boulder, Colorado. This was for elementary through high school kids, and they had all kinds of fun projects. They had drones, they had all kinds of 3D virtual reality stuff, robots, and computers. But the biggest hit was cutting up cardboard boxes, cutting up washing machine boxes and making stuff out of them, making catapults out of bungee cords and some 2x4s and some duct tape. That was some of the most fun stuff, getting kids out there doing hands-on things. There were some of my books. Well, now it's time for my favorite part of the night. I just love to do questions. And if anybody has a question for Daryl Treffert, he'll also be available. Take some questions. So who's got some questions? And I'll pick somebody. Okay, right there. Okay, what's your question? What? I don't have any children. No, I don't. I do have 2 sisters and a brother. And two of my sisters are very, very artistic, and my brother's, he works on solving computer problems with the bank. And it's sort of like, it's a visual thinker solving some of the things that are real obvious. Okay, somebody else must have a question. Okay, right there, you got a mic? Okay, I'm going to pick somebody. I can't believe it. Nobody has a question? Okay, right here. I can probably hear you. I'll repeat the question.
What do you think is causing the
Increase in autism? I think a lot of it is increased detection. I can think of students I went to college with that own businesses that would be labeled on the spectrum today. I worked with 2 metal fabrication companies when I was out in construction all the time. That I know the guys were on the spectrum. How about a guy, dyslexic, ADHD, bad stutter, socially awkward, horrible student in high school, took welding, started making some stuff and selling it. He owns a big metal fabrication company now. See, this is the thing that makes me kind of crazy as I go back and forth between the silos. So I think on the mild end, on the fully verbal end, it's increased detection, a lot of it. Seven-year-old, I want to repeat it so people can hear it. 7-year-old? Can he talk? Okay, so what's his problem then? All right, overly interested in movies and video games. Well, we've got to get the video game playing down to 1 hour a day. They are very, very addictive. Okay, what's he interested in movies? Let's see how we can broaden this interest out. What movies does he like? Credits of movies? So in other words, he's one of these kids that likes to memorize things. Well, the thing is, what you want to do with fixations is broaden them out. Also, as a 7-year-old, when I was 7, there was a lot of emphasis on teaching manners, doing what I call a teachable moment. So if I put my finger in the glass and stirred it, Mother would just say, use the spoon. You give the instruction. Then in between those meals where I got a lot of instruction when I made a mistake, I had lots of time to experiment with kites, do all kinds of hands-on things. So what does he like to do besides do movie credits? Well, he can do a few movie credits, but he just can't do it all day. Or play the credits on a movie over and over again for like 2 hours a day. You can do a little bit of that. I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could do rocking and stuff. The rest of the time, it wasn't allowed. We've got to, the other thing I can't emphasize enough is build on something they're good at. See, when I was about 8, that's when it became obvious I was good at art. But I would draw the same horse head over and over again, so my mother would encourage me to draw other things. Take the interest and broaden it out. Okay, Thomas the Tank Engine's really common. Well, let's learn about how does a train work. There's different kinds of trains. There's electric trains, there's diesel-powered trains. In the old days, there were steam-powered trains. How do they work? You see how I'm taking that interest in Thomas and I'm broadening it out, also into something that's a bit more appropriate for when he gets older. Broaden the fixation out. Okay, right here. Okay.
But can you say, so I bought the book Animals Make Us Human. Haven't had a chance to read it because I bought it 2 hours ago. Can you say something about what we are learning from animals, what we need to learn from animals, why they make us human?
Well, what can we learn from animals? I read a very interesting study in one of the neuroscience journals that I get. It was done on an epilepsy patient. And they do the brain surgery while you're fully conscious. They had an electrode down in the amygdala because they had to see where, because you have to be conscious to figure out which part to burn out. They got to burn out the part that's got the epilepsy in it. And when they were poking around in there, they showed him pictures of animals, both cute and scary and nasty, pictures of people, famous people, and pictures of famous places. And the animals, both cute and nasty, got more of an emotional response than pictures of people did. Animals are part of our history. Also, grazing animals made the best fertile cropland in the world. We had a crop scientist come and address one of our cattle symposiums about 2 years ago. Boy, that was an eye-opener. I'm learning tiny baby crops, really baby kindergarten crops. And I'm learning about how animals used right are part of the soil ecosystem. See, I've been doing a lot of thinking about whether we should be eating meat or not. And learning more about how we got our big brains up here. Yep, animal protein helped that out. But for some people, animals are really great things. Some people on the spectrum, boy, they just really get it with animals. And there's others that don't like them because of the sensory problems. The dog might bark and hurt their ears. One size doesn't fit everybody, but I was so fascinated when I found this study about how the animal pictures, both cute and nasty, triggered emotions more in this epilepsy patient than pictures of people did, or pictures of landmarks.
I work with a lot of families who have people with special needs in their families, and I'm wondering if any of your books, or if you're thinking about writing a book really geared towards parents and how parents can make their children
Well, the thing about
strong.
special needs, there's so many different kinds of special needs. Please don't overgeneralize so much. For young autistic kids or kids with learning problems, the Way I See It book has got a whole lot of little short articles. You don't have to read the whole book. Teenagers having social problems, I've got this unwritten social skills. I also have The Loving Push that really addresses video games and some young people that are making it in the job world. But there's a tendency when we're trying to troubleshoot, and I'm going to use the engineering term. Instead of diagnosis, I like the engineering word. It's called troubleshooting. And you have to figure out what's wrong with a piece of equipment. Is it how it's operated or a design fault? You got a dog behavior problem. What is causing it? You got a problem with a kid. I'll have people say to me, what do I do about autistic behavior problems in the classroom? Well, I don't know. Because I don't even know how old the kid is. I don't know if he can talk. I don't know what he's doing in the classroom. The big problem in troubleshooting is I find on all three areas, both machine stuff, animal stuff, and autism stuff, and special needs stuff, people overgeneralize way too much. How I'm going to deal with somebody in a wheelchair that's got, absolutely normal social and brain and everything else totally different than somebody who's got some other kind of problem. You see, I tend to think specific. Now, you've got to get away from overgeneralizing. You see, on the autism front, On the very severe end, you've got very stressed out families where the child cannot do any normal stuff. You go to church, he's screaming. You go to a restaurant, he's screaming. You can't do any normal things at all. That's a very different situation than a mild Asperger kid that needs to get his butt out of the house and get a job. They're two very different things. And unfortunately, they have the same name, which doesn't make too much sense, okay?
I have a 6-year-old son who is autistic, and I'm very interested in, you said that you had problems with speech when you were younger.
Yeah, does he talk yet?
Yeah, he does talk, but it's one word at a time.
Okay, so he's got partial speech then.
He does, and he understands what we're saying to him. So I know, like you said, don't overgeneralize, and I understand that, but I want to know your experience with it, because I'm, as a mom, really waiting to get that conversation with him.
Well, it's not going to come in all of a sudden. People are always looking for magic super turning points. It's not how it works. It's a much more gradual. And you've got to work on, give him a chance to use words. He's going to be like a slow computer. You know, you got a bad internet connection, and then you push the buttons and the computer freezes. Yep. You've got to give them time to respond. Always give them a chance to use their words. Also, there's a tendency, you know, with some of these kids to do too much for him. Oh, it's quicker if I just put his coat on him. But it's going to take, he needs to learn how to put his own coat on. It's going to take a little more time, but that's the only way that he's going to possibly learn to put his own coat on. And the thing is he gradually improving?
Since I see him every day, it's hard for me to see the improvement because it's very slow. But his teachers at school keep saying he's improving.
Good.
Family members who don't see him every day say he's improving.
People that don't see him every day see it.
Yes.
See, that's often the best way to see the improvement. See, the problem is that improvement is so slow, you don't see it. But if somebody who's been away a whole month will see it. That is sometimes the best evaluation. This person that might go a whole month or two in between seeing him, and they go, oh, wow, he really has improved.
I've noticed that a lot.
Well, and that might almost be sort of a more accurate seeing the improvement.
Say something to that one.
Boy.
Let me respond to that question just a little bit. Yeah.
But if you touch the middle of it, it messes it up. Well, maybe we'll have to use a different one. I think his mic's broken now. Okay.
Yeah. I've had a special interest in children who read early or speak late and have been looking at that population. And as Temple says, it often is a matter of time and slow. Is the child in some kind of treatment with speech and language therapy?
He is. He gets speech therapy in school, and then we have therapists that come to the house, but they do a variety of things. It's not just speech. He gets horse therapy, swimming, just everything.
How many hours of one-on-one kind of therapy is he getting now?
He's getting 30 hours a week right now, and then he goes to school the normal amount of time. He's in kindergarten, and then he has different teachers work with him there too. But he's been bullied. He's in kindergarten, and he's been bullied by other kids in school. I have some really sad stories of things, and the teacher put her foot down and said, you don't treat him like that.
Well, what was done when I was in elementary school, fortunately I wasn't bullied. My bullying started in high school. In elementary school, Mrs. Deach, the head teacher, would talk to the other children and say that I had a handicap, but it wasn't something you could see like polio braces. See, we got to remember it was 50s, right. So it was polio.
Yeah.
And that they needed to help me, and they actually got the other kids to help rather than to bully. Maybe that's something that the teacher ought to do, because bullying that young is bad. These kids need to understand and try to be helpful rather than bullying.
Right. I think that's what a lot of it was. They never seen somebody like my son before, and so they didn't understand.
Well, this is where the teacher needs to explain to the other children that he has a handicap, but it doesn't show the same way a wheelchair shows.
Right.
Because it's inside the
Yeah.
brain.
He looks totally normal, so you would
That's
never
the
know.
problem, yeah.
But he can't speak. They would ask him questions, and he wouldn't be able to
But they have to
respond.
be, they got to explain to the children that the things in the brain that make you speak are not working right. That's got to be explained to the other children.
Yeah.
The other thing I think you have to understand is some kids who speak late are diagnosed to be on the spectrum, and they really aren't. It is a phenomena which occurs because they have autistic-like behaviors for a period of time. I'm not saying this is it or giving any false hope, but I think when you see a child who speaks late, you have to be very careful with an autism diagnosis, and whether it is autism or not, the interventions are the same, and it sounds like you are already involved in that. I want to also address a question over here. You were asking about which book might be most useful for parents, and it's the way I see it is, I think, is what I call a book of hints, tips, and pearls of all sorts of behaviors, and you've done a masterful job of addressing all of those problems. So for that person who wants to learn about how to handle a child, an autistic child, that's the book I'd recommend. If you're wanting to learn more about autism, then you might want to look at some of the other books, the brain book and some of the others. But we're going to distribute that book to all of our staff at the Treffert Center because it's just full of hints, tips, and pearls.
Okay, man, we got another question right there. All right, let's talk about you teach visual thinking. The first thing is that there's a certain amount of it you can teach, because I find that when I ask the speech therapists, they tend to be really, a lot of them really verbal. That's why they went into that field, and they might get the pointy thing. And then I force them to think about a church in their neighborhood. You can lots of times force them to dig down into the more primary graphics files. So a certain amount can be taught. But let's say that the width of this desk is the continuum of visual thinking. Okay, I'm here, I can do full motion machinery visualizations in my head. I'm here. Then I've run into a few people, they're rare, where if I'm meeting with them in their house, they are not able to visualize walking into their own office at the university. Usually most people can visualize their own home or their own car. That's one of the reasons why I ask the church people, because it's something you don't own. So you've got these extremes, but then here in the middle, there's some flexibility here, but the first thing you've got to do is you've got to realize that there are different kinds of thinking, and that, like a mistake like the Fukushima thing, no watertight doors. I mean, when I finally, after reading tons and tons of newspapers on 2 weeks' worth of flights, plus listening to everything I could find on the TV and on the internet, I go, how could you do this? And what I've learned is it's not stupidity. They simply didn't see the water going in there. And that, to me, that's so basic. I can't design a nuclear reactor. But the things that are mechanical, like are the fuel rods going to drop, or are they going to jam in the slots? That's the sort of stuff that, anything is mechanical that can go wrong. That's stuff that I can see. But this is where you need to have the different kinds of minds. Think about the iPhone. The artist made the interface. Steve Jobs couldn't do any programming. And the engineers made it work. That's the different minds working together. So the first step is to realize there are different ways of thinking. And if you team people together right, they complement each other. I had a student that was good at everything I was terrible at. She could run all the statistics programs, did a beautiful job of analyzing the data. But when it came to creative ways to sort the data, that's where I came in. You see, that's different kinds of minds of working together. She was good at everything I was terrible at. So we made a good team. Well, the question was, of all the countries I've visited, which have been most receptive to my message? Well, are you talking about cattle things? Okay, let's talk about cattle things. One of the things that I learned is selling the equipment's easy. Getting people to buy the thing, like the center track restrainer system, those started going in the early 90s. Some new corral system. Selling the thing is easy. The thing that was hard was getting people to use it right. People want the thing, the magical thing. It could be a computer, a drug, it could be something. They want that more than they want the management. And it took me quite a while in my career to learn that the thing doesn't always solve all the problems. And then what really made things get improved, in 1999, I was hired by McDonald's to implement their animal welfare audits. And I came up with a very simple measurement system for meatpacking plants. 5 simple scores they had to make, things like stunning percentage at 95%. And you know what a plant had to do to make that work? Fix their broken stuff. That's the first thing they had to do. And out of the 75 original McDonald's suppliers, and you can read this in my papers I've done for the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, only 3 plants had to build expensive stuff to pass. They had to fix all the broken stuff, manage and supervise their people, put in some non-slip flooring, do some stuff with lighting, simple changes. They had to do the management. Then the next step is they now have AeroSite video auditing. So Mission Control in Huntsville, Alabama can tune in at a random time every day for about 20 minutes and score them. Yeah, it really works. Can't believe how good they've been getting. But the thing's important. But when I first started my career, I thought if I could build the magic thing, it would solve everything. No, in the 80s and the 90s, half my clients tore up the thing and wrecked it. Then in 1999 and 2000, we started those audits that forced them to manage the thing. Our meatpacking plants now, they've never been better. They're better than a lot of European plants. I'm proud of how good our plants are. Can't believe how good they are. But a lot of people go, oh, the educational method, very top down, is going to just fix everything. What matters is really good teachers. That's what really matters. And in cattle, stockmanship matters. This research shows very clearly. And at the dairy today, I saw good stockmanship. These cows were chewing their cud as a huge hydraulic gate was pulled up in the air. That shows that they're doing the stockmanship. That's the management side of things. Okay?
When you think in pictures, is retirement possible?
Is what possible?
Is retirement possible? Could you ever not? Can you get out of bed in the morning and not work?
What do you mean? I always think in pictures. Why would I not work?
What I'm saying is but the analysis and what you do and how you present it today, when your brain works like that, is it possible to retire? I mean, is it possible to? You may not realize that you're working right now.
That I do what?
Working. I mean, you're not at home, you're working.
Yeah, that's right.
My question is, when your brain works like yours does, is it possible to not work?
Well, I'm always thinking about something, and I can control the pictures. Before you had computer-aided design where they could show virtual reality of stuff, I can remember sitting in the 80s and the early 90s, the conference room at one of the Cargill plants, and we were discussing some ways to do some different conveyors. And I go, no, it's not going to work. Then we talk about some other thing. I'd test run it in my mind. They actually almost like working me like it was a computer. And I could look at different configurations of these different rail systems and trolleys going on the rails and say, oh, no, it's not going to work. You're going to break the chains. You're going to do this. It's just not going to work. Now, some people, they get so many pictures coming into their mind they can't control them, but I can control them. Okay, I started to get off the subject on things my shoes stepped in, but I also could stop it, and not just keep on talking for half an hour about that and go on about every Holiday Inn what it was like, because you'd be real bored with that. Okay, how about the orange shirt right there? Okay.
Negative effects of GMOs.
Oh, I saw the stuff about GMOs. And I saw the article in the National Science Foundation saying, GMOs are not harmful. One of the things that I like to bring up when people bring that up, how many diabetics are in this room that use insulin? If you use insulin today, it is a GMO. And it's very proudly put on the label recombinant DNA. In other words, that's the old-fashioned term for GMO. There's also a rennet that's made with the GMOs and cheeses. Part of the problem with the GMO thing is consumers don't like surprises. I think the mistake that was made with that, when the technology was introduced, it flew under the radar. And then all of a sudden, they find out about it. And people don't like that. This is one of the reasons why we did like beef plant video tour with Temple Grandin, because I think we need to just show how the stuff works. And we're getting 90% likes on those videos. And we have pork plant, turkey plant, and sheep plant now. And sheep plant's one of our best ones because we did all the food safety stuff on that too.
I'm a high school agriculture instructor, and one of the things that I stress with my students constantly is advocacy for the agriculture industry. So I guess I'm curious, from your standpoint at Colorado State, what do you do with your college-level students to get them to become better advocates for the industry?
We need to be talking to the people in the cities. You know, one of the big problems I find when I get out into the ag countryside, it may be less of a problem here, but I get out in the more really rural areas, nobody's got a Facebook friend in a major city like New York or Chicago. And there are some people that have been doing some very nice blogs and showing what they do. You got to remember, what's chores to you is interesting, especially to kids. I mean, things like front-end loaders, like scooping up feed and stuff, that's interesting to 10-year-old kids. And we've got to get communicating outside the industry. Also, there's a tendency for people to sort of get like in their tribe, and there's some people that are working in ag and they do things that are bad, either to animals or to the soil or something, and we can't be defending the bad actors. See, there's a high range. There's a lot of people that do just wonderful stuff in ag, and there's a few people that do some bad stuff, and that's not acceptable. But a lot of people are afraid of stuff they don't understand. And the GMOs went for all these years, and then all of a sudden they find out all the grain has got it. People go, ah! Maybe it would have been better in the beginning to explain by having a Roundup-ready grain that you don't have to till the ground and lose the topsoil. It's a lot better than stuff we were doing before. And explain it. The mistake that was made was to not explain it up front. Really think that was a mistake. Okay, the 5-year-old daughters, fraternal twins. I've just got to repeat it. Okay, we're getting a mic over here now.
Thank you. I have 5-year-old fraternal twin daughters. One is on the spectrum and one is not. In your household, you're on the spectrum. Your siblings are not.
No, they're definitely not.
How did your mom find the balance between needs for you and needs for them?
That's always a big issue. I have a sister a year and a half younger. The mother kind of sometimes feels bad that Izzy, that's my sister's year and a half younger, kind of got, left behind. The other two kids were 5 and 6 years younger. So it had a lot less effect on them because we were never in the same school together. But my sister, where it was only a year, 2-grade difference, that had a lot more effect on her. I would say that that sibling needs to get some quality time. Now, one thing with me, by the time I was 6, we were doing normal activities. We could go to church. We could go to Granny's and have Sunday dinner and not have a problem. Go to a movie. Go to a nice restaurant and not have a hassle there. So for most of the time, we could do normal stuff. But you have the family where the child cannot do normal stuff like that. That's really hard. How do you do what? Fix a problem for you. Okay, we're going to get a mic over here so we can hear the problem.
The problem is the lack of funding we have.
The lack of what?
Funding in public schools right now. And what we're doing is, because we don't have the resources, putting the autistic children or the children on the spectrum in special education. And how do we fix that problem with the lack of funding?
Well, down in the southeast, it's nothing at all. And this is a real problem. I think we got to figure out more things we can do in the neighborhood. That's why I push the church jobs, the walking dogs. Let's get some retired mechanics to do a small engine repair in a garage. Another garage could become an art workshop. Somebody else could open up a dance studio. These are all things we could do in the neighborhood. And then see the early intervention, in a lot of places that's gotten better. But you get down in some of the southern states, there's nothing for early intervention. They've got their church. And I said, the worst thing you can do with a 3-year-old's not talking is do nothing with them. You've got to start working with them now. I'd get The Way I See It, and I'd get another book called Autism Breakthrough. I do not like the ABA bashing that's in that book, but the thing that I like about that book is I could give it to a grandmother at a church and she could go do it. Because unfortunately, in some of the states in this country, their church group's all they've got. I know I've given talks in some of the most poorest areas. And things here are better. I really like to program where at 14, they're going to start active employment, so they're not jumping off the service cliff when they graduate from high school. They will have learned how to work before they graduate from high school. I think that's really important. And we got to start thinking about what career can they go in. If the kid's good at art, let's show them how to set up a business. You know, how do you set up a self-employed business? There's actually an association called the National Association of the Self-Employed. Then you've got to set your corporation up or your LLC up. Fortunately, I had a contractor that helped me with that. But these are all, you know, things that you can do. But you got little kids that aren't talking. You've got to start working with them. And the thing that's bad is funding. It's getting tight. I had a real wake-up call when I looked at a business magazine probably 6 or 7 years ago, and it had a diagram of the national budget, pie chart. Half the national budget is Social Security for us old folks here. And they're building all these hospitals around for us old fogies. Being a nurse would be a really good career. There'll be plenty of jobs there. Take care of us old people. No, there's going to be some problems. And for individuals that are really severe kids, they've got to have services. So what kind of thing where have you got a problem? Let's think specific. Okay, when a child's diagnosed, how old a child? So he's like a 5 or 6 year old and he's... Well, you see, the problem you got with autism is you got such a broad spectrum. You got one kid's just kind of geeky, and if the school has enough hands-on activities, maybe just fine. You see, we've got so many schools that have taken out art. I mean, if I hadn't had art and sewing, girls learned sewing in the 50s. I was the second girl in my school in 5th grade to get to take wood shop. But those are the things that made school worthwhile. For another kid, it might be dance or theater. These are things that can turn into careers. And then you have a kid that's got much more severe problems. Well, in middle school, well, when I was a lot of the social skills, I learned were pounded in elementary schools. That's what was done in the 50s. Middle school, we got to start with the work skills. You've got to just teach them. Okay, let's say we're in the store and the kid said something really rude to the checkout clerk. You just explain to them that you may call her a fat lady. That's really rude, and that's not acceptable. Just like Harley explained to me about the pigeon doo-doo welding. When these mistakes get made, they need to be calmly told what the mistake is that they made. You know, it's just that simple. And we need to be getting all the skilled trade stuff back in, because about 25% of them, that's where they ought to go. You see, the geeks and nerds of my generation all got employed. Now, what would happen in my generation is kids that were like me, they usually threw away in institutions. Because I was very severe when I was 3 years old. But the kid that has just sort of a socially awkward kid, now 50s, man, they just pounded in the social skills, and they managed to get and keep jobs. Some of them in skilled trades, some underemployed. I know a guy who's got a PhD in history, who works at a lumber yard, is underemployed, but he's kept the job, and had full health insurance for years. You know, you have more funding here than most places do. Okay, right there. Oh, good, we're getting a mic over there, that's good.
How do you get him to get out of the house when you can't even get him to...
Okay, now get him, now who, okay, give me more detail. How old is he?
13.
13, okay.
Somewhat high functioning. Goes to middle school.
How's he doing in school?
B's, C's, doing pretty good.
B's and C's, okay, so he's passing in school.
Yes.
What's he like to do?
Minecraft.
All right, we're going to have to cut back on the Minecraft. Maybe we can replace it with JavaScript. JavaScript is the programming code that makes Minecraft work. Has anyone ever introduced that?
What is it?
JavaScript, think coffee.
Okay.
There's 4 hot languages in computers right now. There's C++, Charlie++, JavaScript. That's what makes Minecraft work. Ruby and Python, they are all on Khan Academy. Maybe he can start learning how to fix computers. The other thing to get him out of the house is give him some choices.
But that's the problem. I can't get him out of the house without a huge fight, tantrum.
Let him have a huge fight then. You know, there's a point where you say, we'll give you a choice. What other things could he possibly like to do besides Minecraft?
Nothing.
Has he ever tried any other activities?
He's in baseball, he's in basketball.
Does he like baseball and basketball?
It's okay.
Well, what about crafts and making things? What about woodworking or welding or something like that?
He hates anything creative and drawing.
He hates drawing, okay, he hates all of that.
He has very little interest.
Is he good at math?
Yes.
All right, programming. You can learn JavaScript, make your own games, but then he's got to learn how to make a game on assignment that somebody else wants. He also might have anxiety issues. And when he's playing all those video games, it calms down the anxiety. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I describe my experiences with antidepressants. I'll tell you a little secret about us visual thinkers. We're the panic monsters. I've worked with a lot of different industrial designers, working in the meat industry, also seen it in other industries. They're all on Prozac. I'm on a low dose of disipramine, an old-fashioned antidepressant. It stopped the constant anxiety. I've seen a low dose of Prozac keep these really creative guys off of drugs and alcohol. If you get the dose too high, you get agitation and insomnia. He might need a little tiny touch of antidepressant. I'd recommend you read my chapter in Thinking in Pictures called A Believer in Biochemistry, where I tell my personal experiences. But he's got to get and do some other things. The one thing we've got to fight is recluses in the bedroom. They are having awful outcomes. And when I went away to boarding school, they didn't make me study, but I had to go to all the meals. I had to go to all the classes. They absolutely wouldn't let me become a recluse in my room. That's the one line that's got to be drawn. And, you know, let's learn how to do some programming. Let's learn how to do some things. And we'll give them some choices. There'll be choices. After I got kicked out of 9th grade, for throwing a book at a girl who called me a retard, my mother found a special school for me to go to. She picked out 3 schools, and she let me pick one. She picked out 3 schools she liked. So give the kid some choices. But sitting in your room all day playing Minecraft's not going to be one of them. Let's take 2 more quick questions, and then we'll call it a night, and we'll go sign some books. Right there real quick. Well, savant is a very, Dr. Treffert's an expert on savants, but it's a very, special type of extreme skill, which I wouldn't really call myself a savant, especially now. I've lost some of my skills that I had when I was a lot younger. Like Rain Man would be the savant type. Now, do you have, the biggest problem if you're working with high school kids that are socially awkward is they don't understand some of the social things. And I think my book, The Unwritten Social Rules, I did with Sean Barron, and the Different Not Less book would be very helpful to help explain some of the social problems.
Because I was just curious about the terms being used, because I feel it's really important to use the correct terms so kids don't over-associate with their labels, like you talked about having so many students labeled. And I think as...
Well, they're getting all hung up on these labels. Let's talk about super good diesel truck mechanic. Okay, that's a label too.
Right.
But that's a label that gets you a super good artist. I'm seeing kids that are getting so much into their autism, they're not doing an art career that maybe they ought to be doing. I mean, Dr. Treffert's a really big fan, and now maybe he might want to make some comments on developing that area of skill.
Well, I guess you're concerned about people using terms that are no longer applicable, or what?
Yes. Well, I'm a student with a learning disability, and it took me a long time to I associated so much with my label in school. It really prohibited me.
You need to get away from it. Okay, you're a successful counselor now?
I just graduated, so I'm getting there, but yes.
Well, what I like engineering terminology. Okay, you have a disability, like I've got no working memory. In engineering, you do a workaround, and for the lack of working memory, it's called a pilot's checklist. So I'll take those awful MapQuest directions, and I convert them to bullet points on a pilot's checklist, and then I can follow that when I'm driving.
Yep, and I process very similar to a pilot's checklist as well when I do my work. I guess what I'm curious is with my students is, especially in school, when we do data collection and evidence, we're so obsessed with the labels, and I don't want my students to over-associate with their labels.
I think they get totally over-obsessed with it. I'm more obsessed with the outcome, and if I see somebody who could be a great diesel mechanic end up in the bedroom playing video games, I'm going to just get sick because that's not a good project outcome.
Yeah.
I'm realizing how much construction affects how I think. It's all about finishing a job, making it work, and if this kid ends up in the bedroom on Social Security, we did a really lousy job. Especially if it's a kid that ought to be a good artist, a musician, or even just a good retail salesperson.
So I guess my two biggest points out of my question is, what are the correct terms to be using, and how do I advocate for my students without advocating for them just because they have
what are they good at? Take each student individually. It's not overgeneralized. Let's talk about one particular student. I don't know anybody here. All right, what's a kid good at? How old is he? What are they good at?
I have a 5-year-old kindergartner who I'm working with, and
all right, little 5-year-olds, dressing, potty, manners, eating. Let's worry about basics first. Saying please and thank you. That's the kind of stuff I want to get the 5-year-old on talking.
Right, and they're also very skilled with memorization, and they love computers.
Well, and he loves to watch videos?
Yep.
Well, it's okay to watch some videos, but we've got to limit that. The rule in our house was 1 hour a day. That was the rule for just, I was watching one TV show that was on when I was 5, and that was the Howdy Doody show. Then when we got to have more TV, but you limit that. And I got to make sure this kid at 5 can do his basic skills. Let's worry about basic skills. Can the kid potty by himself? Eat properly? Can he dress himself? Can he shower? Is he learning those things? So a 5-year-old needs to learn. To greet people, shake hands. Let's worry about basics. That's what I was being taught when I was 5. Okay, one more quick question. Okay, maybe right here. Okay, my mother's book's called A Thorn in My Pocket, and I am not the thorn. And it's part of a Robert Frost poem. Well, I think we're going to end it there, and I just want to thank everybody for coming. And I'll be out at the book table.
Thank you so much. This was just wonderful. On behalf of Marian University, we'd like to thank you for attending the 9th annual Dr. Treffert Lecture Series. We also would like to thank Agnesian Healthcare for sponsoring this event this evening. And lastly, we would like to thank Dr. Treffert for being bringing awareness to autism and savant syndrome. This event has been recorded and will be up on the TreffertCenter.com for viewing later this week. and you can also share the video once it's up. Temple will be signing autographs. She will not be able to accommodate everyone due to our large crowd, so we thank you again and have a safe travels tonight. Thank you so much.